Chapter 2. Long Passage Skill Practice. Skill A. Understanding main ideas and organization. Number 1. Campus life.
Excuse me, Professor. Do you have a minute?
Sure, Felicia. What can I do for you?
Economics has been really tough this semester, and frankly, I feel sick when I think about the exam.
Well, let's look at what you need to do.
Great. I have been really worried these past few days.
Well, first, I would suggest looking at some old exam papers. Becoming familiar with the format and typical questions can really make a difference, you know.
That's a good idea. Where can I get a hold of them?
Well, the library has approved exams given by professors at our university for all the undergraduate courses. It's called the Old Exam File, or OEF.
Fantastic.
The OEF is also available online. It's on the Blackboard system. Have you heard of that? The web address is courseweb.stateu.edu. But to use the online Old Exam File, you need to register first.
No problem. How do I do that?
Oh, it's very simple. Just send an email to tutoring@pobox.stateu.edu and give them your name and student ID number.
Hold on a sec. That's tutoring@pobox.stateu.edu, and they need my name and ID number?
That's right. After they let you know that you've been registered, go to the site, click on the links.
Now, this is the courseweb.stateu.edu site?
You got it. Once you're there, just click on the links to access and print out the old exam that you want. It's simple.
You know, I feel better already. I think I'm suffering from fear of the unknown.
That's probably it. The anxiety is worse if you don't know what to expect.
Thanks.
Best of luck, Felicia. If you use those old papers as a study tool, I know you'll be okay.
Thanks, Professor Fraser. I'll get onto it right away.
Yes, do that. And if you're still worried afterwards, get back to me.
1. What are the speakers mainly discussing? Two. What is the main point the professor makes? 3. According to the professor, which 2 items of information do you need to register for the Blackboard system? 4. Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
Thanks, Professor Fraser. I'll get onto it right away.
Yes, do that. And if you're still worried afterwards, get back to me.
Why does the professor say this?
If you're still worried afterwards, get back to me.
Number 2. Geography.
When you think of big mountains, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Many people will immediately respond, Mount Everest. This response is logical because Mount Everest is in fact the tallest mountain in the world. Many people have even climbed this mountain, which of course is no easy task. However, Mount Everest is not the most difficult mountain to climb. The most difficult is actually K2. K2 is the name of the second tallest mountain in the world. It is located in an area called the Karakoram in northern Pakistan. Now, a little history. K2 is the second of Karakoram's peaks. For that reason, it was named K2. When a British surveyor was naming these mountain peaks, he saw another peak in the Karakoram region first. So that was K1. Then he saw K2. So, in these names, 1 and 2 have nothing to do with height, as some people naturally assume. It's just the order these peaks were named. K2 was first surveyed or measured in 1856. At that time, the height of K2 was determined. Do you have any idea how tall K2 is? Well, it is 8,611 meters tall. At the time K2 was first surveyed, the mountain had not been climbed by anyone. That is, no one had ever reached the top. It's no coincidence, of course, that the world's 2 tallest mountains, Everest and K2, are part of the same mountain range, the Himalayan mountain range. So, we ask ourselves, why are the Himalayas so tall? Well, the Himalayas are actually one of the youngest mountain ranges on the planet. They began forming about 50 million years ago when the Indo-Australian plate collided with the Eurasian plate. In fact, the Himalayas are still growing, about 5 millimeters per year, as the Indo-Australian plate continues to smash into Asia. Because of its incredibly tall mountains, the Himalayas attract a lot of climbers. K2, specifically, attracts mountain climbers with its extreme height and difficulty to climb. There are a number of difficulties involved in climbing K2. Perhaps the main difficulty is the weather. Strong winds are common. Bad snowstorms are also frequent. Combine strong winds, terrible snowstorms, and over 8,000 meters of altitude, and you can imagine how hard it is to climb.
1. What aspect of mountains does the professor mainly discuss? 2. What is the talk mainly about? 3. What is the evidence the professor gives to show how difficult it is to climb K2? 4. Why does the professor say this?
Now, a little history.
Number 3. Music.
Acoustic musical instruments are common throughout the world. Simply put, an acoustic instrument is any instrument that makes sound. This lecture will introduce you to an acoustic instrument invented in the 20th century. Its name is the steel pan. Often it is simply called the pan or steel drum, and it is played by musicians in a steel band. The steel pan is both an instrument and a form of music which originated in the country of Trinidad in the West Indies. It was a Trinidadian by the name of Winston Spree Simon who first discovered the instrument. That was in 1939. He was beating an old oil drum with a corn cob, and obviously he liked the sound. He discovered that different areas on the surface of the drum created different notes. In the 1960s, the steel pan underwent further innovations. A drum called the fourths and fifths was introduced. The fourths and fifths drum could produce a much broader scale than previous steel pans. This allowed even more different kinds of music to be played. Also, the appearance of the steel pan instrument itself changed. Wheels were added to the pans, and they were also covered with canopies. These canopies were covers that protected the pans and the players from the hot sun. If you've ever been to the West Indies and under the Caribbean sun, you'll know how important it is to be in the shade. I was there last winter, and if I wasn't swimming in the ocean, I was sitting under a canopy listening to steel pan music. I highly recommend it. Now, steel pan as a musical form has also undergone many changes. The first pan band dates back to 1940. These first bands were rhythm bands, mostly for dancing to. However, during the 1940s, techniques were developed that enabled melodies to be played. This meant that a steel pan performance could be the focus of a concert rather than an accompaniment to a dance. These first steel pan melodies became known as panyards. Panyards, then, are melodies played on steel pans. But this word also refers to the areas or yards where steel pan music is played. Both meanings of panyard were and still are important to communities in the West Indies. By the 1940s, steel pan music had spread from Trinidad to other nearby West Indian islands. In 1951, steel pan was played for the first time outside of the islands when the Trinidad All-Steel Percussion Orchestra played at the Festival of Britain in the United Kingdom. Now, as you all know, I hope, steel pan is popular across the globe. In fact, let's listen to some right now to end the class.
1. What is the talk mainly about? 2. What is the speaker's main point? 3. According to the professor, what is one change that was made to the steel pan in the 1960s? 4. What does the professor imply when she says this?
Techniques were developed that enabled melodies to be played.
Number 4. Campus life.
My dorm room looks like a cemetery. There are dead plants everywhere.
My place used to look the same way, but I found the answer.
Really? What's that?
Well, in some ways, houseplants are a little like pets.
Pets?
Yeah, they will probably be stressed when you first bring them home.
Oh, so that's why the leaves fall off during the first few days at my place.
That's right. But if you try to make the new home similar to the old one, then they can still survive.
What do you mean?
Well, you need to make sure they have familiar conditions. You may need to make some changes to your dorm room.
That sounds like a lot of work.
My thoughts exactly. I think it's more prudent to choose plants that match the conditions you already have in your room.
Of course. Why didn't I think of that?
Just do some research and find plants that will be happy to live at your place. Take a look over here.
Wow, those orchids look great.
Yes, they're right at home in the bathroom with all that light and moisture. That's why I bought them.
What about that one over there?
Do you mean the aspidistra?
Yeah, I guess so.
It doesn't need much sun, so I put it over in the corner.
So it's as easy as that?
Well, yes, just do your research first. You too can be an expert.
Thanks, Anne. You won't recognize my place the next time you visit.
1. What is the conversation mainly about? 2. What is the woman's main point? 3. According to the woman, why is the orchid at home where it is? 4. Listen again to part of the conversation and answer the question.
Well, yes, just do your research first. You too can be an expert.
Thanks, Anne. You won't recognize my place the next time you visit.
Why does the man say this?
You won't recognize my place the next time you visit.
Number 5. Education.
Our lecture today will focus on success. In particular, I'd like to explain how experts define success in children with learning disabilities. Did everyone read the article by Dr. Marshall Raskind? Most of what I will talk about today comes out of that article I gave you. It was the article, or interview really, in which Dr. Raskind talked about how to define success for different kids. In the interview, Dr. Raskind was asked 2 questions. First, he was asked to define what success is. Secondly, he was asked to provide a description of how kids with disabilities become successful adults. These are 2 interesting and not so easy questions to answer. Let's start with Dr. Raskind's definition of success. Dr. Raskind told the interviewer that success means different things to different people. However, he gave the interviewer a long list of factors that seem to be common among successful people. These factors include, let me see. Oh yes, having strong family ties, having supportive friends, being loved, being physically and mentally healthy, and having financial security. Also, successful people generally have a feeling of meaning in their life. Dr. Raskind pointed out that not all of these factors must be present to be successful. Nonetheless, a very successful person might have most of these factors: strong family ties, good friends, good health, money, love, and meaning in his or her life. So, these are the factors that determine success in normal people. What about people with learning disabilities? Dr. Raskind, as well as many other researchers, has done studies to determine the success factors for people with learning disabilities. The factors that have been identified with success for the learning disabled are a little different. Those factors of success include self-awareness, perseverance, support systems, and emotional coping strategies. Remember, as with other people, not all of these factors have to be present. Also, these success factors do not guarantee that a learning disabled person will be successful. However, they do increase their chances of success. Therefore, friends and family of a person with a learning disability should try to help the person be self-aware, choose his or her own actions, and persevere, all the while encouraging him or her emotionally as well. It's important to remember that success factors for the two groups are slightly different. Not all factors have to be present in a person's life for them to be successful. Lastly, while these factors increase a person's chances for a successful life, success is a subjective measure.
1. What is the lecture mainly about? 2. How does the professor emphasize his point about differing success factors? 3. What are the main ideas in the presentation? Choose 3 answers. 4. Why does the professor say this?
It's important to remember that success factors for the two groups are slightly different.
Number 6. Biology.
Many people think that dolphins and porpoises are exactly the same. Although they are similar in many ways, a dolphin is not a porpoise, and vice versa. There are both similarities and differences between the two. Let's learn about some of these similarities and differences. First, they're both mammals belonging to the scientific order Cetacea. This order includes all whales, to which both dolphins and porpoises are related. Second, both belong to the same scientific suborder Odontoceti. This suborder is made up of toothed whales. However, they do not belong to the same scientific family. Porpoises belong to the family Phocanidae, that's spelled P-H-O-C-O-E-N-I-D-A-E, and dolphins belong to the family Delphinidae, that's D-E-L-P-H-I-N-I-D-A-E. Okay, now if we examine porpoises and dolphins at this level, they are as physically different as dogs and cats. Let's compare their physical characteristics. Porpoises are much shorter than dolphins but appear to be heavier. The porpoise's dorsal fin, that's the fin on the back, is triangular. The dolphin's dorsal fin is shaped like a wave. The dolphin has a very noticeable beak. The porpoise does not. Because they belong to the same scientific order and suborder, they share many of the same characteristics. For example, they are both completely aquatic mammals. They live in the water. They have a blowhole for breathing and a tail fluke. However, as mentioned before, they have many physical differences, including size and different shaped dorsal fins and beaks. Oh, and there was one more difference I forgot to mention. The dolphin is thin and sleek compared to the chubby porpoise. Remember, although they appear very similar to us, at the family level we can compare their relationship, as we did earlier, to the one between cats and dogs. So, physically speaking, dolphins and porpoises are different. But there are also behavioral differences between the two. Porpoises are shy while dolphins are not. Usually, porpoises only come up out of the water to breathe. Dolphins are social. They will often follow fishing boats. You are more likely to see a dolphin both in the wild and in captivity than a porpoise. Let's review what we have discussed today. If you happen to see a sleek mammal with a blowhole, a wave-like dorsal fin, and a beak playing in the water near a boat, what would it be? A dolphin. And if while scuba diving you ran across a chubby mammal with a blowhole and triangular dorsal fin that swam away when you came near, what would it be? A porpoise.
1. What is the lecture mainly about? 2. How does the professor emphasize her point about porpoises being less sociable? 3. According to the professor, what is one characteristic of a porpoise? 4. Why does the professor say this?
However, as mentioned before, they have many physical differences, including size and different shaped dorsal fins and beaks.
Skill B. Understanding details and facts. Number 1. English.
I think I've received everyone's topic for your written project. At least I hope I have, since the deadline was Friday. On that note, we are going to spend today discussing writing tips. These tips will help when you are planning and writing your essay. There are 4 basic steps you can follow in writing for this class, or any class really. When you are writing, you should look at planning, composing, organizing, and finally, editing. Editing could include fixing small things or revising the content of your essay. But we'll start with the first step, planning. Planning can include free writing, brainstorming, outlining, and journaling.
Professor, what is free writing?
Good question. When we free write, we simply write down all our thoughts on our essay topic. It helps us get a feel for our subject. If we save our free writing to a computer file, we can transfer the best parts of that file to our essay.
I understand. Thank you.
The next step is composing our essay. We should begin writing by writing quickly. At this point, don't worry about punctuation or sentence structure. At this stage, you just want to get lots of ideas down on paper. You can also use abbreviations if it helps you write faster.
Excuse me, I have another question. Is it okay to use abbreviations in our essays?
No, not in the completed essay. You should take out all the abbreviations in your final essay. Also, once your rough composition is complete, you must finalize the sentence structure and punctuation. Think of it this way. Once you're finished composing, a friend of yours should be able to pick up the paper and read it. The essay is not organized yet, but it is readable. Sentences and punctuation should be in place, but no abbreviations. Next, organize your essay. You can move sentences or even paragraphs. This is easy if you use the cut and paste function on your computer. Lastly, revise and proofread your essay before turning it in.
1. What is the lecture mainly about? 2. According to the professor, what is included in the first step in writing? 3. According to the professor, how many writing tips or steps are there? 4. Listen again to part of the talk. Then answer the question.
Think of it this way. Once you're finished composing, a friend of yours should be able to pick up the paper and read it. The essay is not organized yet, but it is readable.
What does the speaker mean when he says this?
It is readable.
Number 2. Linguistics.
Good morning, everyone. This morning, I'd like to introduce you to the concept of speech community, a concept belonging to psycholinguistics. It describes a particular group of people who share certain characteristics and whose members all agree to use language in a unique way. Confused? Let me see if I can make it clearer for you. Speech communities can be groups of professionals, such as doctors, groups of students, perhaps high school students, religious followers, or even groups of very close friends or family members. Oh, and let's not forget online groups, like regular members of a chat room. Group members make up part of an in-group. Outsiders and non-members don't understand the speech and often feel excluded, whereas members feel a sense of identity and belonging. Think about groups you've encountered. I'm sure you'll have noticed that the stylistic features of speech communities differ according to the group's socio-economic status, meaning their social class or status in society. But a speech community might also speak in a certain way because society expects them to. We don't expect doctors to speak in the same style as a group of musicians, right? We expect more formal speech from our medical practitioners, and we'd be shocked if our children spoke to their friends in a formal style. Each one of us here today is probably a member of several quite different speech communities, and we almost certainly alter our speech depending upon the community we are interacting with. Think about it for a minute, and I'm sure you'll recognize what I'm talking about. I'll use myself as an example. I certainly use a very different style of speech with my group of golf buddies, guys I've known since grade school, than I do with my group of academic colleagues. Take a moment to think about your own lives. A real challenge can occur. I'm sure you'll know what I mean here too. When you find yourself interacting with speakers from two or more of these speech communities of which you're a member, you have to find a way to make your speech appeal to speakers from both or all communities. Imagine you're trying to interact with a group of close family members and members of your peer group over dinner. I see you know what I mean. It may not be as relaxing as talking with just one speech community at a time.
1. What aspect of speech communities does the professor mainly discuss? 2. According to the professor, which of these may be a problem? 3. What are two examples of speech communities the professor mentions? Choose two answers. 4. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
A real challenge can occur. I'm sure you'll know what I mean here too. When you find yourself interacting with speakers from two or more of these speech communities of which you're a member.
What does the professor imply when he says,
a real challenge can occur?
Number 3. History.
The focus of our lecture this morning will be on the OECD. We will learn about what it is, talk briefly about its history, and consider what it does today. We have a lot to cover, so listen carefully. Some of you know what I mean by the OECD, others may not. OECD stands for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Quite a long title. The abbreviation OECD is much easier to remember and say. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is a mouthful. Now, you are probably wondering exactly what the OECD is. Well, it is an international organization. Its members are developed countries that believe in democracy and a free market economy. Let's start with a bit about its history. The OECD came into being to help rebuild Europe after the Second World War. I'm sure you're all familiar with the destruction in Europe, especially in France, England, and Germany at that time. Originally, only European countries were members. In 1961, however, non-European members were admitted, and its scope became more international. Today, the OECD is a group of like-minded countries. They help the governments of countries become prosperous and fight poverty. To be more specific, the OECD helps provide economic growth, financial stability, technology, and trade and investment. Oh, and the organization is also aware of the importance of the environment. They work hard to ensure that achieving prosperity does not mean ruining the environment. The OECD also helps governments understand and respond to new developments in the areas of terrorism, new technologies, and aging populations. In other words, the OECD changes with the times. The OECD also collects statistical, economic, and social data. This data is highly respected and used by researchers worldwide. So, to recap, this is what we have discussed so far. This will be on the test, so you may want to write it all down. The OECD was formed to help the rebuilding of Europe. In 1961, its membership expanded from European-only countries to democratic and free market economy countries around the world. Today, the OECD helps countries become prosperous and fight poverty. The organization also helps governments understand terrorism, new technologies, and aging populations. It is also a well-respected collector of statistical, economic, and social data. I want you to understand that while the OECD has only 30 members, non-members can subscribe to OECD agreements and treaties. The organization shares its information and expertise with more than 100 countries.
1. According to the professor, what does OECD stand for? Two. According to the professor, when were non-European countries admitted to the OECD? 3. What are key features of the OECD? Choose two answers. 4. What does the professor imply when he says this?
The organization shares its information and expertise with more than 100 countries.
Number 4. Campus life.
Hi, Sarah. What's up?
I'm checking out the college course catalog for next semester.
Oh, really? Which college are you looking at?
I'm looking at Woods College. They have lots of good courses in the catalog here.
Woods College? I know that is a very good school, but it is so far away.
I know, that's true. Woods College is halfway across the country from here.
Well, how can you go there? I mean, you have a job here, and you have to work to help support your family. Are you really contemplating leaving this city to go study at Woods?
Oh no, I couldn't leave this city. After all, I have a job and a family.
Then how can you study there? Why even bother looking at the catalog?
Because I can take classes through their distance learning program.
What's a distance learning program? I've never even heard of one of those.
Well, it's kind of new. Distance learning means that you can take classes at a college that is in a different city or state, but you can take the classes from your home.
How can you take classes from a college if you don't even live there?
Through your computer. It's like taking classes over the internet.
Wow, over the internet. That sounds convenient and probably fun too.
Yes, it requires some technology. For example, you have to have your own computer.
What do you need besides a computer? Do you need some kind of special connection to the internet at home?
You need a computer with a modem and an internet connection. That's it. Nothing special.
Is there anything else you need?
You need a lot of memory on your computer. Some schools recommend having several gigabytes of free space. You need lots of memory to store the files and lectures on your computer.
I have a computer with an internet connection, but not much memory.
You could always buy some extra memory for your computer. Upgrade it. It's really not too expensive. Then you could take distance learning classes with me. It'd be fun.
You're right. And taking extra college classes would look good on my resume.
You bet. Why don't you sit down and look at the catalog with me?
1. According to the students, which of the following is needed for distance education? Two. What does the woman say about computer space? 3. What are the reasons for not going to the school? Choose two answers. 4. Listen to part of the conversation again. Then answer the question.
It's really not too expensive. Then you could take distance learning classes with me. It'd be fun.
You're right. And taking extra college classes would look good on my resume.
What could be inferred about the man?
You're right. And taking extra college classes would look good on my resume.
Number 5. Health.
Today, I want to consider natural alternatives to aspirin for pain relief. You may know that before aspirin, people used salicin to fight pain. Salicin is quite different from aspirin and occurs naturally in plants such as willow bark and meadowsweet, among others. Many doctors believe it may be safer to use these natural sources of salicin rather than aspirin. Let me explain exactly why it might be a good idea to throw away our bottles of aspirin and reach for the herbal preparations. Why do we use aspirin? It helps get rid of our headaches, right? Yes, it does. So, what are the problems with using aspirin? Well, aspirin can also produce some harmful side effects. We want the pain relief from aspirin, but we don't want the stomach irritation, the thinning of the blood, and the allergic reactions. What about the side effects of the natural sources of salicin, you might ask? Well, it's interesting to note, and this is important, there is no evidence to suggest that these natural sources produce similar negative side effects. In fact, they can often be used to treat these negative side effects. Okay, so aspirin can cause stomach problems, thin blood, and allergic reactions. Let's look more closely at some of the natural sources of salicin. We'll start with willow bark. Willow bark can relieve stomach irritation and actually stop minor bleeding, one of the side effects of aspirin. Willow bark has been used for centuries. It became popular in treating the inflammation associated with gout, a very painful disease. In addition, it can reduce fevers and kill intestinal worms. Then there's meadowsweet. It can aid digestion, calm irritated stomachs, and like willow bark, it can stop minor bleeding. Again, we have an herbal preparation that can treat conditions that aspirin may actually cause. So, to recap, there are proven negative side effects associated with the use of aspirin, and no evidence to suggest similar negative side effects with the use of herbal preparations. Sources of salicin such as willow bark and meadowsweet are readily available today, and for many people may provide a safe alternative to aspirin.
1. What is an example the professor gives of herbal preparations being useful? Two. What is an important point the lecturer makes about herbal preparations? 3. What are negative side effects of taking aspirin mentioned in the lecture? Choose two answers. 4. What does the lecturer imply when she says this?
In fact, they can often be used to treat these negative side effects.
Number 6. Cultural Studies.
This lecture is going to introduce you to traditional Chinese philosophy. First, you will learn about, the yin and yang philosophy. Secondly, we will look at the 5 elements of this philosophy. It is important that you remember these 5 elements as we will be discussing them throughout the lecture. The 5 elements of yin and yang are water, wood, fire, earth, and, metal. Okay, so those are the 5 elements. Let's begin with a definition of yin and yang. Yin and yang should be considered as opposite forces, like land and ocean, for example. These are opposites. Now, These opposites do not compete with each other. They are complementary. When you think of yin and yang, think complementary opposites. So, moving from complementary opposites, let's return to the 5 elements we mentioned earlier. If you recall, we said they were water, wood, fire, earth, and metal. The Chinese divided yin and yang into 5 elements to gain an understanding of how the body, mind, and spirit work. According to the Chinese, every person's physical and mental health relies on a balance of the 5 elements. Individuals may have more of one element than another. Of course, ideally, all elements are in balance or harmony. What does this mean? It means that a person's body contains equal amounts of each element. The amount of each element in an individual's body determines his or her physical and mental health. When all of the elements are equal, a person is healthy. When they are not equal, or there is an imbalance, you get sick. The type of sickness depends on the elements that are out of balance. Okay, we're going to get into these specific illnesses next time. Before you go, let's review what we have covered today. We have defined yin and yang. They are complementary opposites. Secondly, we discussed the 5 elements of yin and yang. They are water, wood, fire, earth, and metal. These elements are always changing, and the balance of these elements within our bodies determines our health.
1. What does the professor say about the elements in the body? 2. According to the professor, what are yin and yang? 3. What does the professor say about yin and yang? 4. Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
Yin and yang should be considered as opposite forces, like land and ocean, for example.
Why does the professor say this?
Like land and ocean, for example.
Skill C. Determining reasons, purposes, and attitudes. Number 1. Campus life.
Hi, I need some information about the student activity fee. Can you help me?
Sure. What would you like to know?
Well, first of all, what exactly is the student activity fee?
Well, that's easy. The fee is $15, and since autumn 2003, all students entering the university have been required to pay it.
All students must pay it?
That's right. It's a quarterly fee paid by undergraduate and graduate students.
Paid quarterly? Wow, I thought it would just be once a year.
Nope.
How much money does the university collect from this fee?
Right now, there is a little over $2 million in the fund.
That's a lot of money. Who decides how it is spent?
That would be the Council on Student Affairs. You will find both students and faculty making the spending decisions.
I see. Do I have my facts correct? The fee is $15 per quarter per student. Both students and faculty decide how the money will be spent.
Exactly.
Now, I know who decides on how the money is spent. Can you tell me what types of programs receive funds?
The list is a long one. It includes free concerts, lectures, comedy shows, second-run films, late-night programming. Just about any worthwhile student program or event can obtain funding.
Can I become involved?
Of course. The easiest way to get involved is to join the student union. They are always looking for students with good ideas.
I will think about that. It would be fun to find ways to spend the student activity fee. Thanks for all your help.
You're welcome.
1. Why does the student say this?
I see. Do I have my facts correct? The fee is $15 per quarter per student. Both students and faculty decide how the money will be spent.
2. What is the student's attitude toward the activity fee? 3. Why does the woman want to know if she can become involved? 4. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
I thought it would just be once a year.
Nope.
What does the man mean when he says this?
Nope.
Number 2. History.
First up this morning, I'm going to talk about Her Majesty the Queen of England's official palace and fortress, the Tower of London. After briefly touching on its construction and location, I want to focus on a couple of its historical uses. Over time, the tower has been used for pleasurable purposes and for truly terrible purposes. I will discuss one example of each. The tower as a zoo and the tower as a place of imprisonment and execution. Okay, let's begin. The Tower of London is actually a complex of buildings. It's situated along the River Thames in London. Its name comes from one particular building, the White Tower, built by William the Conqueror in 1078. It is surrounded by a moat, a channel of water that goes all the way around it. The use of the tower changed from being a fortress at around the beginning of the 13th century. At that time, a royal menagerie, which is a fancy word for zoo, was established at the tower. Much later, this was opened to the public so that commoners could also enjoy the animals. Unfortunately, the animals at the royal menagerie were not particularly well cared for. Eventually, they were all moved to the new London Zoo, which opened in Regent's Park in 1835. Now for the dark side of the tower, and by dark, I mean truly grim. For a very long time, the Tower of London was used as a prison and a place of public and private execution. Beheading was a popular method. This involved chopping the head off a prisoner with an axe, not always a very sharp one. The executioner often had to swing the axe several times. Hanging was another popular method, usually reserved for the lower classes. Sometimes public executions provided great entertainment, believe it or not. This was especially the case when condemned prisoners were famous people. Examples of famous people who were publicly executed are Sir Thomas More and Queen Anne Boleyn. In fact, some people say Queen Anne still walks around the tower carrying her head under her arm. So, just to recap before we break, the Tower of London was originally built as a defensive fortress by William the Conqueror in 1078. Starting in the 1200s, it was used as a zoo for royalty, and later for commoners too. Finally, it was used as a prison and a place for public execution.
1. What does the professor mean when she says this?
The Tower of London was originally built as a defensive fortress by William the Conqueror in 1078.
2. What does the professor imply about the royal menagerie? 3. Why does the professor mention the axe used in executions? 4. Why does the professor say this?
Over time, the tower has been used for pleasurable purposes and for truly terrible purposes.
Number 3. Music.
Today, we will continue talking about great opera composers. I'm sure you remember from yesterday's lecture that there are many fantastic opera writers. Now, I'd like to give you some information about another very famous composer. His name is Giuseppe Verdi. Like most composers, Giuseppe Verdi is normally called by his last name only. Verdi was born in 1813. With a name like Giuseppe Verdi, where do you think he might be from? Of course, Verdi is from Italy. Verdi began to show a great interest in music at an early age. At only 8 years old, Verdi began to play musical instruments. Do you have any idea what his first instrument was called? Now, this is just a fun fact. You don't need to memorize this. His first instrument was called a spinet. Like I was saying, Verdi's family quickly realized his great interest in music and sent him to study music formally. By the time Verdi was 10 years old, he was studying at a music school and taking private music lessons. He studied with some very good musicians. So you can see that Verdi not only had natural talent, but he also practiced to become a great musician. When Verdi was 26 years old, he wrote an opera called Oberto Conte di San Bonifacio. Don't worry about writing down the whole name of that opera. We can just refer to it as Oberto for short. You can copy down the full names of Verdi's operas from my website. What's really important here is that this opera, Oberto, really was the beginning for Verdi's success. Although Oberto was not a huge success itself, it was successful enough to earn some recognition for Verdi. After writing Oberto, Verdi went on to write many more operas, and with each opera, Verdi became more and more famous. What is interesting about Verdi's fame is that people who supposedly knew a lot about music at the time didn't like him. In his time, Verdi had a lot of critics. There were many people who did not like his work. However, most of these people were music critics, that is, people who evaluated music and were considered professionals. The critics particularly disliked some of Verdi's operas because of their political messages. Verdi's real fans, though, were the common people. He was liked more by the public than the musical elite, the critics of his day.
1. What does the professor mean when he says this?
Verdi's real fans, though, were the common people.
2. What is the professor's attitude toward Verdi? 3. Why does the professor mention Verdi's opera Oberto? 4. What does the professor imply when he says this?
Now, this is just a fun fact. You don't need to memorize this. His first instrument was called a spinet.
Number 4. Geography.
Did everyone see the title of today's lecture? The Great Lakes of North America. You are all nodding yes. That's great. Now who can tell the class how many lakes there are and their names?
I think there are 4 lakes. Names? Let's see. Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior.
Good guess. You have the 4 names right, but there are 5 lakes, not 4. Can anyone recall the name of the 5th Great Lake?
Isn't it Huron or Huron?
It's Huron. The 5 Great Lakes are Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. There is an easy way to remember them. Anyone know how to easily memorize the names of these lakes? No? The easiest way to remember them is to use an acronym. An acronym is an abbreviation in which each of the letters stands for the letter in a list of words to be remembered. The acronym for the 5 Great Lakes is HOMES. If you remember this acronym, you can effortlessly recollect the name of each Great Lake: Huron, H, Ontario, O, Michigan, M, Erie, E, Superior, S.
That's cool. It makes remembering the names really easy.
Let me share a bit more information with you about the Great Lakes. Lake Superior is the largest and the deepest, therefore the name Superior. Lake Ontario is the smallest in area. The only Great Lake entirely in the U.S. is Lake Michigan. All of the other lakes are partially in the U.S. and partially in Canada. Now let's review. What is the acronym?
Homes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior.
Largest?
Lake Superior.
Great! You should have no trouble with the Great Lakes on the exam.
1. What does the professor mean when he says this?
Great! You should have no trouble with the Great Lakes on the exam.
2. What does the professor imply about Lake Huron? 3. Why does the professor mention homes? 4. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
What is the acronym?
Homes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior.
Largest?
What does the speaker mean when he says this?
Largest?
Number 5. American Studies.
We all know that wars are difficult. They're difficult for soldiers sent away to battle, of course, but they're also difficult for people back home. Today, I'd like to talk about some of the hardships people faced in the, U.S. during World Wars I and II. Now, one major hardship was the lack of food. All of these troops fighting overseas needed to eat. Ask yourselves, where does that food come from? It comes from the same farms that produce food in peacetime, except that a lot of the farmers are now gone to war. During wars, you see, the public food supply often runs short. So to, help solve this problem, the U.S. government encouraged private citizens to grow their own food. They asked people to plant their own gardens and feed their own families. These gardens were called victory gardens. In these victory gardens, people tried to grow their own vegetables, fruits, and even herbs to use in cooking. So, how successful do you think these victory garden campaigns were? Can you imagine turning your backyard into a vegetable garden? No? Not many of you, huh? No green thumbs in this class? Actually, victory gardens worked really well in the U.S. The government placed posters about victory gardens everywhere. As an example, in 1944, the posters had the word "Plant More" in 44 on them. This resulted in over 20 million Americans planting victory gardens. Pretty impressive, huh? These gardens produced a huge amount of food. In fact, historians estimate that 40% of all of the vegetables consumed in the U.S. that year were from victory gardens. This meant that, more vegetables from large farms could be canned or processed and then shipped overseas to feed the troops. Victory gardens were a huge success during both World War I and II. As a result of private citizens' efforts, both the troops and the public were able to have enough food during the war years. When World War II ended in 1945, people were ready to get back to normal life. But, unfortunately, there were still hardships to face. Believe it or not, one of these hardships was a lack of food. You see, once the war was over, people immediately stopped planting their victory gardens. They expected that food production would go back to normal immediately. Of course, this was not the case. It took some time for production to get back to normal. As a result, the public actually experienced worse food shortages in peacetime than during either World War I or II.
1. Why does the professor ask this?
Ask yourselves, where does that food come from?
2. What is the professor's attitude toward victory gardens? 3. What does the professor imply about the years after World War II? 4. Why does the professor say this?
Victory Gardens were a huge success during both World War I and II. As a result of private citizens' efforts, both the troops and the public were able to have enough food during the war years.
Number 6. English.
What would you say if I told you all humans are cats?
I might say you're crazy.
Haha, okay, fair enough. That statement does seem kind of crazy. Why does it seem crazy? Because we know it's wrong. We all know it's wrong. Today, we're going to look at fallacies. Fallacies are errors in reasoning, wrong thinking, if you will. An argument that contains a fallacy is said to be invalid or unsound, or crazy as some of you might put it. Now we can test the validity of an argument by checking to see if it contains any fallacies. The ability to test for fallacies is essential to critical thinking, and critical thinking is essential to earning a high grade in this class, so pay close attention. Now we will look at one category of fallacy, formal fallacies. Formal fallacies are only found in one particular kind of argument, the deductive argument. The simplest kind of deductive argument has two statements or assumptions, and then a conclusion. It's called a syllogism. That's S-Y-L-L-O-G-I-S-M. Now, don't get confused by big terms like this. Remember, a syllogism is an argument with two assumptions and a conclusion. It's simple stuff, really. Okay, now, if the two statements or assumptions are true and provide complete support for the conclusion, then we say the argument is valid and there is no error in reasoning, no formal fallacy. However, even when the two statements are true, if they don't provide enough support for the conclusion, then we say the argument contains a formal fallacy and is invalid. More simply put, the argument contains errors in the reasoning, or if you prefer, it's crazy. Here's an example of a syllogism containing a formal fallacy. 1. All humans are mammals. That's a true statement. 2. All cats are mammals. That's a true statement too. 3. Therefore, all humans are cats. That's an incorrect or crazy conclusion. We already know this. You see, each statement is true. All humans are mammals, and all cats are mammals. But these two statements do not completely support the conclusion. The conclusion, therefore all humans are cats, is clearly false. The fact that humans and cats both belong to the same family of animals that we call mammals does not mean that humans and cats are the same thing. There is a formal fallacy in the argument. Remember, formal fallacies are mistakes in the logic of a deductive argument, and a deductive argument with two statements and a conclusion is called a syllogism. It's very important to remember then, when you are making arguments for my class or for any of your other classes, to check for and avoid formal fallacies.
1. What does the professor imply about syllogisms? 2. What does the professor imply when she says this?
Formal fallacies are only found in one particular kind of argument.
3. What is the professor's attitude toward syllogisms? 4. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Now, don't get confused by big terms like this. Remember, a syllogism is an argument with two assumptions and a conclusion. It's simple stuff, really.
Why does the lecturer say this?
Now, don't get confused by big terms like this.